There were few things that I was seeing that I will just clarify to you. Yesterday we were not over with the talk till 1966, so I'll go on with that today. It was just that I know that some of you have a class at 5:30, so I didn't want you to be very delayed. So I ended the class at 5:25 odd, a little after that. So that's what I plan to do in general. But now, coming to the point, so we will still talk about 1966 and talks thereafter. One thing that some of you had asked me, and I saw it on the group also. So when I said consumption demand was rising, that was the rise in demand for commodities. But then I said consumption supply capacity was not there because the small scale industries were not doing well. And why the small scale industries were not doing well? Because they didn't have enough capacity to produce because of lack of support from, say, the government. All right. So economies of scale were missing, the advantage of large scale production. The logistics costs were very high, transportation, storage, these facilities were missing. So that is why consumer goods production was not as high in India as what we had expected it to be. But in the meantime, for 15 years, the demand had grown high. Since the demand had grown high with rise in income and so on, so suddenly we had a demand-supply gap. All right, so that is the aspect of the talk I was trying to do with you yesterday. There are still few points left on India between 61 and 66. I had not concluded it as yet. We will conclude that and then go further, trying to go into the next time period, 66 to 80, and then thereafter. And I will keep giving you the trends, as I had been doing till now. I will keep giving you the trends, and along with giving you the trends, I will also keep giving you the reasons for those trends. That's the purpose. Then another thing that was about notes that I saw. So if you can send anyone over here, this I'm talking mainly to online people. Offline people have no issues on that, of course. So if you can send anyone to collect your notes, you can collect it from over here. Some of you said that it will be, see, ideally, if you ask me, it's easiest to take a printout. We are a world where it happens like that. Half of the things, if you ask me, we read digital. So that is why I thought it is like that. But believe me, the logistics are not something that will support to send things to you immediately. All right, I'm talking again to online people mainly, that the logistics will not be there to support everything. Now, I give you the notes in pieces for only one reason, because I keep revising them myself also. All right. Ours is a subject where I can add a topic, I can remove a topic from the system based on what I believe is sometimes more important or less important. So it's not something where I could have just printed a book and told you, okay, you take this, because every year something gets added. And then few things get subtracted, looking at the papers, looking at the trend of the papers. So we know that, okay, a few things don't need to be done because UPSC is not taking interest in it anymore. But many things get added also, no doubt. So now India between 47 and 91 is relatively static. So in that case, I could still give you 31 pages on it, which is on agriculture and so on. Still, this is not entire India between 47 and 91. When I teach you right now, I teach you the trends in industry. Savings and investment trend I'll teach you later. That is on, hopefully, I think day before tomorrow, day after tomorrow, I'll be doing that. So, but then one suggestion I have for online people who cannot take a printout. मान लो आपको लगता है नहीं सर printout नहीं निकाल सकते हैं, हमारे ऐसा हालत नहीं है अभी. तो आप एक काम कर सकते हो. Let me finish few topics, and then you can come over here and maybe collect the large chunk of notes all together. All right, like once I have done micro, macro, Indian economy between 47 and 91. So in hopefully another 1 month, 35 days, these things will be covered, maybe 40 days. So once these things, because micro takes a lot of time because that's the foundation. I am sure those of you who come with economics background already know that, but even otherwise micro and macro are foundations based on which only we build the further economics. So micro and macro, I do micro especially, I do spend some time, plus the syllabus part there is large and the difficulty level of questions can be more. I'm talking micro in that, so I do give more time to it. But still around, after today, it will be 3-4 more classes, I think, another 5-6 more classes or 7 more classes on Indian economy part that we will need. And then we will shift to micro. So over next maybe 1.5 months, we can reach there. So those of you who online who need the notes can always send someone And in chunk, you can collect the notes on micro, macro, international economics, development theory, and the Indian economy notes. That I can try doing. But other than that, my best suggestion is that take a printout and stay where you are. I mean, why trouble yourself to come over here to collect notes, spending more money than what you can spend, and not only money, even the effort. I'm sure you are economists, at least the budding ones. So, so you would know that there is something called real cost in this world. So you know you are spending a real cost traveling all the way, coming over here, and so on. हाँ अगर तुम किस कोई डाउट्स पूछने आ ही रहे हो तो एक अलग बात है, या दिल्ली में ही रहते हो आसपास हो तो एक अलग बात है. बट इफ यू ट्रैवल ऑल द वे देयर इज नो पॉइंट. टेक अ प्रिंट आउट and get it going. In case printout costs are exorbitant for you, you know, it's easier for me to transfer the money to you than to transfer the, material. Believe me on that. तुम बोलोगे मैं तुम्हें अपने अकाउंट से पैसे ट्रांसफर कर दूंगा, मुझे कोई आपत्ति नहीं है. और मैं सीरियसली बोल रहा हूँ, मजाक में नहीं कह रहा. दैट मैं ये कर सकता हूँ. दरअसल से ओके ये तुम्हारा प्रिंट आउट कॉस्ट है, तुम निकाल लो मेरे कॉस्ट पे, मुझे उससे कोई आपत्ति नहीं क्योंकि तुम मेरे ही बच्चे हो. तो तुम ठीक करो, वो मेरे लिए ज़्यादा ज़रूरी है. गॉड हैज़ बीन काइंड, सो that is not a concern anymore. And I'm an economist. I weigh my money properly, you know. So don't worry. I don't do any favors, etc. But in case that is the concern. But मुझे जो worry कर रहा है वो ये है कि तुम पिछले 2 दिन से इस डिबेट में लगे हो कि आखिर इसका होना क्या चाहिए. तो इसका मतलब है कि तुम पढ़ नहीं रहे उस वक्त. वो मुझे चिंता में डालता है. कि आप जब उस डिबेट में जाते हो ना, मिलना चाहिए नहीं मिलना चाहिए, क्या करना चाहिए, जाऊंगा नहीं जाऊंगा, इतना टाइम तो तुम नहीं पढ़ रहे हो. और अगर तुम 23 अटेम्प्ट दे रहे हो तो इतना टाइम तुम्हारे पास है नहीं. इफ यू आर समवन हु इज अपियरिंग 2023, यू डोंट हैव एज मच टाइम. द टाइम इज एट प्रीमियम फॉर यू एट द मोमेंट. तो इसीलिए थोड़ा कॉन्शियस हो जाना. जिनको भी दिक्कत है साथ में तुम मुझे पर्सनल मैसेज भेज सकते हो अगर तुम्हें कोई भी डाउट है, कोई दिक्कत है. मैं बिल्कुल ऑब्जेक्ट नहीं करता. It may take me some time to respond. You will see my responses coming late in the evening because my classes get over by then and only then I get free. Then I start giving you the responses. Since morning around 7:45, I am in my classes and generally till evening I am in my classes. So after that I can always respond, but I do respond. So that is another aspect that I would suggest you should keep in mind. Also, when you are reading through things, the material I have given you, some part of it I will be using tomorrow. Right now I am not using that because that material is kind of a supplement to what I am teaching you. All right, it gives you some more ideas on what is import substitution. You would have seen there are 2 pages on import substituting industrialization. Mahalanobis model I have deliberately not taught you. I will be covering up on that when I am teaching you development theory. All right, so that is where it will make more sense rather than right now. But I have given you parts of Mahalanobis model also in the notes. So the objective is you read through. एक और suggestion है मेरा, जो आप topics लिख रहे हो, जैसे आपने notes लिखे या data लिखे, उन्हें अभी से learn करने की कोशिश मत करो. Just familiarize yourself with that. Revising it maybe couple of times. All right? Because if you will try learning them right now, A, it will become very tedious for you. The whole world will become pretty hectic. B, more importantly, you won't be able to retain it at the moment. So it's always good to read through them, familiarize yourself, and you don't need to remember exact the decimals to the core. ये नहीं है कि तुम्हें 3.6 और 3.7 ऐसे याद रखना है. ये सब मेरा काम है तो मुझे याद हो गया है. It's my job as a person. But what you can do is you can only remember the trends, what was rising, what was falling, by how much did it increase. Even if you write the trends in your paper, they mark you decent. If you can remember, if you have a decent memory and reading it again and again, if it becomes familiar, तब तो definitely वो एक advantage है, no doubt. अगर तुम कोई 4.2 लिखेंगे और कोई approximately 4 लिखेंगे, फर्क तो है ही. But तुम्हें ये decide करना है that what is the cost of it. That are you spending too much time doing that? If you're doing that, don't do it. It's not that important. You just need to remember the trends. Remember the trends. I deliberately start with this topic. This topic is all about trend setting in the system. There was one more request from one of you about giving you a break. I think Samarpan had asked for that are giving you a break in the middle of the class. Honestly, I cannot do that. Your class is already only a 2 hours, 30 minutes class. Normally, I prefer a 3-hour class, but your class is only, but then I realize that third hour में आधा घंटा जो आखिरी होता है वो मैं ही बोलता हूँ और आप किसी तरह मुझे झेलते हो. तो मैंने कहा चलो ठीक है, let's make it 2.5 hours. Now in 2.5 hours also, if I give you a 10 minutes break, then you know these 10 minutes over 110 classes will be too much of a time. You know, that is the point I'm trying to again explain to you. आपको अगर मेंटल ब्रेक लेना होता है तो ऑफलाइन वालों के लिए मेरा सजेशन है कि आप अपनी जगह से उठ सकते हो, मुझे कोई आपत्ति नहीं होती. आई एम अ लेस फर्स्ट पर्सन. You know, so if you feel that you are losing it entirely, get up from your place, go out, take some fresh air, come back. You know, but if you feel you can sustain it, perfect. Because end of the day you have to write 3-hour papers. तो अगर तुम 2.5 घंटे सुन नहीं सकते तो 3 घंटे लिखोगे कैसे? तो 3 घंटे लिखना, और 3 घंटे सिर्फ एक दिन लिख के नहीं छूटेगी बात. You will have to keep doing it 3 days continuously. You know, and then the optional paper after a 7-day break. So UPSC tests you physically and mentally. So better is to simulate. You know, जितना simulation रखोगे, जितना लगातार, मैं तो वैसे भी कहता हूँ, not only in the classroom, even outside the classroom, when you are studying on your own, keep the mobile to a distance where your arms can't reach it. Assuming you don't have superpower to stretch your arm wherever you would like it. You know, so assuming that if your arms can't reach that place, wonderful, then sit down and just go ahead and study well. You know, 3 घंटे, 3.5 घंटे, 4 घंटे बैठने की आदत डाल दो कि बिना हाथ में कुछ और लिए हुए लगातार बैठूंगा. सिमुलेशंस वर्क वेरी वेल. तुम्हें किसी और कारण से नहीं बता रहा, लेकिन अपनी बात को रखने के लिए तुम्हें बता रहा हूँ. रीचिंग दिल्ली स्कूल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक्स यूज्ड टू बी समथिंग दैट आई हैड अ लॉट ऑफ डिजायर ऑफ. तो मैं क्या करता था कि अपने 3rd ईयर ग्रेजुएशन डेज में आई सिट अलोंग and solve past year papers, practice papers, because there was a competitive exam. And I was obsessed to the extent that I would even sometimes switch off my fan and switch off the light, only open up the window of my room in the hostel room. I was in Hindu hostel. And then I would, you know, solve questions for 3 hours, assuming that if there is a power cut that day over there, still my mind should keep working. And the benefit, now that was a little too much, but then I am. So I can't help it. मैं अभी भी ऐसा ही रह गया हूँ. लेकिन उसका फ़ायदा मुझे एक ये हुआ कि जितने नंबर मेरे थे एंट्रेंस में ना उतने नंबर उस वक्त किसी के आए थे, और जो सेकंड टॉपर थे वो मुझसे कुछ 30-32 नंबर पीछे थे. तो मुझे नज़र आया कि जब मैंने मेहनत की और सिमुलेट किया, दिन भर पढ़ा, काम किया, तो उसका नतीजा भी मिलता है. तो इसीलिए सिमुलेशंस इंपॉर्टेंट हैं, क्योंकि आपको सिचुएशन तो कुछ भी फेस करना पड़ सकता है. उस वक्त ये थोड़ी कहोगे वो मैं क्या बताऊँ, उस दिन ऐसा. साफिन एक बहुत अच्छे मेरे स्टूडेंट हैं, अब तो दोस्त भी हैं, IPS हैं गुजरात में. तो साफिन की एक बात आपको बताता हूँ जो उनके साथ हुआ. विद साफिन इट हैपेंड. दिस वाज 3 years back when he was appearing for his interview. You know what happened? During his mains exam, and that year he became an IPS. I'll tell you the conclusion in advance. You know, I'll spoil the story first, but I need to keep you interested in this. During the year in which he became IPS, during the mains exam, the fellow had typhoid. And then he wrote the mains exam with typhoid. Then on the interview day, when he was going to take the interview, he had an accident in which he fell down, had a bruise on his hand, went to the hospital, got it bandaged, and then went to take the interview. And still did well and qualified for the IPS. So point is, that is when you keep this in control. अपना अगर मुंडी ठीक से कंट्रोल में रखा है, things work. If you can control your mind better, you are programmed to think positive. That's important. You know, programming to think positive is important. जैसे मैंने ग्रुप पे देखा, आप में से एक ने लिखा था कि एड्रेस क्यों मांगा, तो किसी ने लिखा एड्रेस मांगा क्योंकि जब हम बन जाएंगे तो हमें पर बुलाने आएंगे. मैंने आपको पहले ही कहा है मैं सब कुछ पढ़ता हूँ. तो आप एक बात सोच के देखिए कि अगर आप इकोनॉमिक्स की बात करें, you would hardly see me propagating it. You know, I don't believe in it. I believe that if I tell you that these many, आप जब मैं क्लास में भी आया, मैं कभी नहीं आपको बोलता हूँ कि मेरे ये वाले इतने स्टूडेंट पिछले साल क्वालिफाई किए, उससे इतने स्टूडेंट उसके पिछले साल क्वालिफाई किए. आपने सुना होगा कहीं कहीं से इस बात को जरूर. मैं क्यों नहीं बोलता? बिकॉज अगेन आई एम एन इकोनॉमिक्स स्टूडेंट. आई वोंट लेट यू डू adaptive expectation error. How many students qualified who studied with me is adaptive expectation error. वो पिछले साल बात हो गई, खत्म. इस साल की बात कुछ और है. इस साल मैं आपको जो पढ़ाऊंगा वो मैटर करेगा. पिछले साल तक जो किया वो खत्म हो गया पिछले साल के साथ. आई लिव माई लाइफ लाइक दैट. एंड बिलीव मी, तुम बन भी जाते हो जब ऑफिसर्स, मेरे लिए तुम्हारी हैसियत इतनी होती है जो अभी है. यू नो, इट डजंट चेंज फॉर मी. मेरे लिए तुम अभी हो. मैं अभी भी तुम्हें बहुत प्यार करता हूँ क्योंकि तुम मेरे स्टूडेंट हो, और कोशिश करता हूँ कि जितना हो सके तुम्हें हेल्प कर दूँ. आगे भी अगर तुम्हें कोई हेल्प करने की जरूरत पड़ेगी कर दूंगा. ऐसे कोई काम मैं नहीं करता जिसके लिए मुझे किसी ब्यूरोक्रेट की जरूरत पड़े. ऑनेस्टली मैं तुम्हें बता रहा हूँ, आई पे माई टैक्सेस ऑनेस्टली, आई लिव इन अ नॉर्मल हाउस, माई रिक्वायरमेंट्स आर लेस, यही हूँ मैं बस, ना ही मैं कोई बहुत बड़ा आदमी हूँ, बहुत बड़ा होता बहुत कुछ स्टेक पे होता तो मेरे लिए ज़रूरत होती। तो रीज़न वो नहीं है, बट पता है मुझे क्यों परेशानी हुई, अब ये नेगेटिव थिंकिंग तुम्हें डुबा देगी, ये मत करने होने दो बस। थिंक एज मच पॉजिटिव एज पॉसिबल. If you think positive, if you remain energized, somebody asked me the other day, how come you have this much energy that you start in the morning and at night and still you have a smile? I said, smile is my students and that I know always. Smile is you, without any doubt. तुम लोग देख लेता हूँ हंसते हो, मजाक कर रहे हो, तो मैं भी हंस लेता हूँ, मजाक कर लेता हूँ. But energy is because I think positive. You know, मुझे आज 25 साल हो गए पढ़ाते हुए इस साल. I'm in my 25th year of teaching. I started teaching since I was 21. Never in my class did I feel that anybody insulted me. तो या तो मेरे समझ नहीं आता, you know, but मुझे कभी फील नहीं हुआ. I always felt that you guys have been great to me and I feel thankful. Otherwise I wouldn't have taught 25 years. I would have been doing my research alone. But remain positive. कोई तुम्हें आसपास आकर बोले भी ना और तुम्हें लगे भी कि अगर ये तुम्हें हर्ट करने के लिए कह रहे हैं तो समझो ही मत उस बात को. Stay foolish, stay happy. You know? अब सोचो एक बात ऐसी, कोई मजाक कर रहा हूँ बस, पर आप सोचो, आप जा रहे हो, रोड पर एक गाय खड़े हैं या भैंस खड़े हैं या बुल खड़े हैं, यू नो, देयर इज अ बुल, देयर इज अ काउ, देयर इज अ बफलो. उन्होंने आपको देख के किया मो, ऑलराइट, से द बफलो डज दिस, इट डज मो. नाउ यू कांट डिकोड इट, नो, you don't know what that moo means. You are looking at that buffalo. Now if you are in a good mood you will say such a nice buffalo moo. You are in a bad mood you will say buffalo moo. You see that? Remain like that. Don't decode people, even if you think they are trying to underestimate you or undermine you or draw you down. Don't decode them. You know, तुम कैमरा के आगे खड़े हो. If you don't decode them, that is a better idea always. बहुत से बहुत कोई आकर तुम्हें क्या कहेंगे, कोई बात सुनाने चाहेंगे उल्टा, तुम डिकोड ही मत करो. मैं इसलिए तुम्हें समझा रहा हूं, तुम मेरे बच्चे हो, मैं बार बार बोलता हूं और मानता भी हूं इस बात को, तुम्हारे सक्सेस में ही मेरा सक्सेस है. सक्सेसफुल होने के लिए बेस्ट तरीका होता है, पिक योर बैटल्स वेरी केयरफुली. देयर आर फ्यू स्मॉल बैटल्स यू डोंट नीड टू पिक. अगर सॉरी बोल के झंझट खत्म होता है और तुम आगे बढ़ सकते हो और पढ़ाई में टाइम मिल जाएगा तो बोलो सॉरी और निकलो आगे. यू नो, डेवलप दैट एटीट्यूड. से सॉरी, गेट अहेड. आज कहानी सुना रहा हूँ तो एक और तुम्हें सुना देता हूँ, सिंस उस मूड में आ गया हूँ तो. that was around 10 years back. I was going with my son, 12 years back rather. My elder son was 6 odd years old. I was going with my son. I was driving my car and मैं क्लच पे गाड़ी चला रहा था. दिल्ली में वैसे चलती है, आपको पता ही है. तो मैं क्लच पे गाड़ी चला रहा था. जो लोग कार चलाते हो समझ रहे होगे क्लच पे कार चलाना क्या होता है. So I was driving on clutch. Now suddenly a person put a brake on his bike in front of my car. It was a packed road. I put the brake, but my car touched his bike. Nothing happened. His bike did not fell. Nothing happened. Bike remained steady, but my car touched his bike from behind. He came along. He parked his bike in front, जो होता है हमारे शहर में. He came along. उन्होंने knock किया. Now his size was this, you know, and his thickness was this. So size-wise, I was far superior, but I don't believe in all that. I also got out of my car. उनको शायद लगा होगा आप झगड़ा होने के कुछ चांसेस हैं. मैं कार से निकला, मैंने कहा आई एम एक्सट्रीमली सॉरी, आपको चोट तो नहीं लग गई? अब उनके समझ ही नहीं आया क्या बोले. वो तो सोचे थे अब होगा झगड़ा, थोड़ा मजा आएगा, गाली वाली देंगे एक दूसरे को. जरूरत ही नहीं है. नाउ माई सन वॉज सीइंग दिस, यू नो, he was a 6-year-old, he was seeing this and he was a 6-year-old. वो चले गए, उन्होंने कहा नहीं चोट नहीं लगी लेकिन आपको देख के चलाना चाहिए. मैंने उनके कंधे पे आई एम एक्सट्रीमली सॉरी, मैंने देख के शायद नहीं चलाया, आप भी अचानक रुक गए, बट आपको लगी नहीं, चलिए अच्छा हुआ. He left, I left. My son asked me this. He said, तूने सॉरी क्यों बोला, गलती तेरी तो नहीं थी. मेरे बच्चे मुझे तू ही बुलाते हैं. उनको मैं नहीं सिखाया है, बिकॉज आई एम मोर फ्रेंड देन फादर टू देम. तो मुझे तू बुलाते हो, कभी आएंगे तो आप उनसे मिलेंगे, आप देखेंगे भी, तू इधर आ, बैठ, कैसा है, वी टॉक लाइक दैट. तूने कहा तू, तेरी तो कोई गलती थी नहीं, तो तूने क्यों सॉरी बोला? आई सेड बिकॉज आई एम समवन हु हैज मोर इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग्स टू टेक केयर ऑफ. सो इफ आई स्पेंड माई एनर्जी फाइटिंग विद समबडी ऑन द रोड, इट डजंट मेक सेंस. देयर आर बिगर बैटल्स टू टेक. कुछ नहीं तो देश को डेवलप तो देखे मरने से पहले. तो ये तो सबसे बड़ा बैटल है, स्पेशली इंडिया में, जहाँ काफी लोग मान कर बैठे हैं कि नहीं मैं तो डेवलप्ड नहीं होऊंगा. यू डू व्हाटएवर, आई विल नॉट गेट डेवलप्ड. बट एनीवेज, दैट अपार्ट, दैट्स इनसाइड माय हार्ट दैट आई वुड लाइक टू सी इंडिया डेवलप्ड. बट यू नो, बिगर बैटल्स, तो तुम्हारे लिए भी बिगर बैटल है. यूपीएससी है, तैयारी है, मेहनत है. तुम स्मॉलर बैटल्स में मत जाओ. डोंट गो इनटू ऑल दैट. एंड लास्ट बट नॉट द लीस्ट, अभी तुम क्वालिफाई नहीं किए हो, बिल्कुल मत समझो कि तुम कर गए हो. द वर्ल्ड विल फूल यू एंड देन लाफ एट यू. पीपल विल कम टू यू एंड टेल यू, अरे बन जाओगे तो हमारा ख्याल रखना, प्लीज टेक केयर ऑफ आवर्स वंस यू क्वालिफाई. बी वेयर ऑफ सच टॉक्स. Sometimes at subconscious level these talks start affecting us. We start thinking मैं बन गया हूं. तुम अभी prelims दिए तक नहीं हो. You know? So never go that far. That oh, one day when I will qualify, then I will work for women empowerment, and one day when I will qualify, then I will work for country's development. Do that. Who will stop you once you qualify? But right now, what is the most important thing to do? Qualify. So all your energy should be devoted to qualify. Just keep thinking like that. Okay, got to qualify. You can have wonderful intent in your mind. And I appreciate that. मैं तो youth से मिलकर वैसे ही बड़ा खुश रहता हूँ क्योंकि आप लोग मुझे positive intent दिखाते हो. But positive intent work तो तभी करेगा ना जब things on ground work करें. तो work करना तभी ज़रूरी है. It's important that you keep in mind that I got to qualify. And you qualify only when you work in a particular direction. So please do that. I took 10 minutes of your life and told you all this. But I told you because now with optional people there is a better connect because you will see me every day and I'll see you every day and we kind of you become my children because you are economics optional people. So in that case I want to always assure that no negativity comes into you. करो ही मत. मैं फिर कह रहा हूँ अगर कोई irritate भी करते हैं ना तो हंसने लग जाओ. That has worked very well for me. When I see somebody behaving irritably, मैं उसमें फन ढूंढ लेता हूँ. मैं भी इकोनॉमिक्स पढ़ाऊंगा आपको, आप देखेंगे बहुत जगह मैं मजाक करूंगा. इसलिए नहीं क्योंकि मुझे उसमें मजाक दिखता है. I realize that if I don't see fun in the bad policies we make and we have made in the past, I'll go mad. So see fun in it. That my God, humans normal and behaving like this. You know? So it's like that. कोई आकर तुम्हें बोले भी ना, मैं तो तुमसे ज्यादा कमाता हूँ, हंसने लग जाओ कि मैं अभी भी एनिमलिस्टिक टेंडेंसी में है. Animals think like that. मेरे पास ज़्यादा है, उसके पास कम है. Humans have better things to do in life. Now every human has an animal inside, no doubt about that. You know. So if every human has an animal inside, then that animal is what has to be tamed. That is what is called civilization. Don't let that animalistic tendency run high. That's not called being aggressive. लोगों को लगता है कि being aggressive means if I'll shout and if I will dominate. No, being aggressive means day in and day out, with discipline, doing your work so good that end of the day you are successful enough. Chest beating से थोड़ी aggression होता है. You know, अगर हमने और तुमने decide किया कि इतनी देर में ये काम करेंगे और मेहनत करके वो काम खत्म कर लिए, वो aggression है. जो 14 घंटे पढ़े अगर तुम, तो वो aggression है. ये तो सबसे आसान है, ओए मैं तुझे दिखा दूंगा. ये aggression थोड़ी है, ये तो anger है. Reflects something about you. That you are so disturbed within that you are now shouting outside. You know? So beware of these things. As your coach, I am telling you all this. This exam tests you on all that. You know, it will test your patience. It will test your energy levels. So be careful on that. But regarding the materials, online people can always come and collect it. After a month, you can collect the entire paper 1 and paper 2 that I've taught you. By then, apart from that, I will be giving you notes in any case with every session that I'll teach you, like micro notes and macro notes and so on. I will be giving it to you. Total notes will be around 1500 odd pages. Believe me, around 1200 pages will be total notes. And add to that another 700, 800 pages that you would have written in the class. Like every class, you will write 6-7 pages. And gradually you will see that becoming better over the period. So, अगर 7 pages भी सोचो और 110 classes भी सोचो, तो 800 pages लिख रहे हो. अगर तुम वो 800 पेजेस पढ़ लेते हो और जो मैं तुम्हें दे रहा हूँ approximately 1000 pages, I'll give you 1200 pages. I don't exactly recall, but it's nothing less than 1200, 1500 pages. So if I give you something like that, 2000 pages is good enough for you, you know, to read, revise it once more, and so on. Your past year question answer solutions, I'll give you. All right, so don't worry about that. I'm already developing it. Micro, macro, international economics, and Indian economy before 47. These 4 sections we have already developed. Other sections we are developing. I've already done the recordings to the question answer session. So I have given all the answer. Now my assistants are developing the written form of that, and I have discussed it on the video. So now those written formats will be available to you, hopefully in the next couple of months. So regarding past year papers, we will sort it out. Plus many answers to past year papers, I will give you in the class itself. Like when I'm discussing things, जब ये सब भी मैं आपसे discuss कर रहा हूँ ना, तो काफी सारे जैसे एक साल question पूछा उन्होंने that give a trend, I think last to last year, that what was the trend of capital goods and consumer goods industry development in India. Now that I'm telling you while writing this answer, I'm doing this discussion, the trend of capital goods and consumer goods industry in India's development. So many answers I will give you in the class itself, but even otherwise, the whole booklet you will get on the past year question answer solution. So that is not a problem at all. That also we are willing to distribute. All right, so yesterday we had done it till, yes, yes. The question I'm asked is Silver Jubilee की आपकी celebration कब है? आप ही लोगों के साथ कर लेंगे. We can have a nice farewell celebrated together. I did it with the last batch also, L4. We had a nice time with them, you know. So I'm an old man, so you design the system and I can finance it. You know, so we do it like that. But वो farewell आने तो दें पहले. You know, but करेंगे वैसे ही. I do it with all my batches, that when the batch gets over, we have a small party, we enjoy life together, we talk to each other, and you do all sorts of things. One person was mimicking me the other day, you know, and that was a bad mimicry. So I told him, I said, look, mimicry मैं भी करता हूँ क्योंकि कभी-कभी तो उनको बताया मैंने करना ऐसे चाहिए. You know, आप मुझे बोलोगे नहीं करने को. You know, मेरी उम्र हो गई है. But jokes apart, what point is that we will have a celebration, no doubt, not for 25th year or ये तो खैर एक normal है, 25 years तो हो ही जाएगा, time तो बीतेगा ही, लेकिन आप लोग हो साथ में यही celebration है. All right, and I'm honestly telling you, my biggest fear is the day you guys start rejecting me, what do I do? Then I have reconciled that I will go and research alone. Like these days I teach and research, so I decide, okay, the day students say that he's not good enough, then I will do only research rather than teaching and researching. तो अभी तक तो चलिए आप लोग इज्जत दे रहे हो. Let's see this then. So yesterday when we were discussing things, we had done it till 1966, you know. Now I needed this also, you know, I needed this also for you, that you should know that you know 51 to 66, and I'll teach you poverty in India separately, but 51 to 66, government was mainly focusing on a trickle-down approach. Now, it was not that government was not going for poverty alleviation, but the general focus was trickle-down. All right, trickle-down as in government was thinking that let growth happen, and growth can take care to some extent of poverty. But understand a point here. It was not that they were not doing anything to remove poverty. It was just that there was no direct attack on poverty. Like the policies were not made in a manner that, okay, let's eliminate poverty by directly targeting it through an employment program or through a nutrition program. That was not happening, but that had a reason. The reason we were not directly targeting poverty was because we were not having enough resources to do that. You need to have some richness to get that happen. Now, that was the plan also. The plan was that in the first 15 years, 20 years, we grow quick, and by 1970, 71, 66, that kind of a thing, like I'm talking to you, Mahalanobis's plan. So Mahalanobis's model had said in 1956 that, all right, next 15 years we will follow capital intensive growth and we will develop all the structure, and then we will have large growth in India. And once we see that capital goods industries are in place in India, then we will start focusing more on consumer goods and wage goods as they are called. And also we will focus on poverty alleviation, because by then we will have enough money to create more education, more healthcare and all. So every 5-year plan, starting from the first 5-year plan, always had chapters on education, chapters on healthcare, chapters on hunger removal from India. So it was not that planning was ignoring it. I'm trying to clarify something to you. If somebody asks you that did the planners not talk about poverty alleviation before 1971? The answer is no, they did talk about it, but they said that the resources are limited, and initially the resources have to be put on growth, and especially on capital goods growth. So if the resources can be put on growth, especially the capital goods growth, then in that case economy will develop some self-sufficiency, and once we have self-sufficiency, then we can talk about targeting poverty. Now the problem happened was that the growth did not pick up as much as what we would have liked it to be. And that became the real stumbling block in India's development program. Now I take you into one cause first. So I believe you are clear on the part that that supply of consumer goods industry was the problem, demand was not a problem. And I told you today, and I'm repeating myself, supply of consumer goods was a problem mainly because of the constraints on supply. All right? Less supply of consumer goods mainly due to constraints of supply, less supply of consumer goods mainly due to constraints of supply. Now, what were these supply constraints? One was lack of well-developed infrastructure. That was one constraint on supply. Lack of well-developed infrastructure. Now, capital goods exporter would have meant, Akanksha, that we should have produced a lot of capital goods, but our own requirements were also very high. Yes, Gaurav, I am. Yes, trend for economic structure will be important, Pranav. They have asked it twice, rather thrice in the past year papers. नहीं तो मैं time pass क्यों करता तुम्हारे साथ? All right. Let's see this then. So when we talk about this, so one is lack of well-developed infrastructure. Logistical costs remained high. Now a question can come to your mind that this could have affected the capital goods also. So why consumer goods? Because in capital goods, the government was giving its own impetus. So if railway had to be used to transport, then rather than consumer goods, it was the requirement of capital goods that it would transport first. If roads had to be constructed, then rather than constructing them for consumer goods sector, the government would focus first on capital goods development sector. You understand that? So government's impetus was on capital goods. So obviously capital goods restrictions were comparatively lesser as compared to the restrictions on consumer goods. Then second reason was lack of raw material due to lack of timely import of intermediate goods lack of raw material due to lack of timely import of intermediate goods. That was another problem that we were facing, that there was lack of timely import of intermediate goods, which led to lack of raw materials. And why was the timely import missing? I can believe you understand that when we use the term timely import, it means that imports were not coming when they were needed. All right? And many consumer goods were there which needed, like say refrigerator. It's a consumer durable. All right? Or several types of toys manufactured in India. Consumer goods. So there were many consumer goods which were using imported raw material. But these imported raw materials were not available on time due to two reasons. Restrictions on imports. Restrictions on imports. Don't forget, we were following a policy of import substitution. So there was a strong feeling within the system that we should be doing import substitution no matter what. All right, we were following a policy of import substitution. So there was a strong feeling that we should be doing import substitution no matter what. All right, so this was one policy that we were following. So this was one, so that lack of raw material due to lack of timely intermediate goods. And the other was foreign exchange constraint. Foreign exchange constraint. मैं आपको पढ़ाऊंगा ये बात अलग से भी. I will teach you this separately. But this is what economists like Medal would call, and even Tomlinson called it, the dual gap problem. That your domestic resources are not enough to pay for domestic investment, and then your foreign exchange reserves are not enough to pay for your imports. That is a dual gap issue. All right, but then I will teach you dual gap over a period of time. we will understand that. But that is one problem. क्योंकि देखो जब तुम कुछ import करते हो तो तुम उसके लिए रुपए नहीं दे सकते, डॉलर चाहिए. When you import something, you can't pay in rupees, you need dollar. So where do you get your dollar from? Only either if you export something, or you take loans, or somebody gives you aid, or you allow foreigners to invest. One way or the other, you will make your dollars. So the problem arose for many developing economies, including India, that they required imports to a great extent, but those imports were not available, mainly because they did not have the foreign exchange to pay. Now why? We were getting enough or comparatively higher aid from World Bank, loans from the countries. Still why the foreign exchange was a problem? Because again, most of the foreign exchange was used to import those commodities which would be suitable in production of capital goods. So in that case, the foreign exchange availability for consumer goods remained lesser, sometimes absent. Then there was another problem here, lack of economies of scale, in small scale industries. Lack of economies of scale in small scale industries. Yes, I'm already covering the sectoral composition. If you recall the first class, we talked about what was the case in 1951. Now I'm talking to you on how it developed. I will again discuss with you what was the case in 1991. Tell me one thing. I wrote lack of raw materials due to lack of timely import of intermediate goods. Now, just to clarify to you, all raw materials are intermediate, but all intermediate are not raw materials. All right, raw material has a connotation of things which are extracted from nature and used by industry. All right, so agricultural products or minerals, they are raw materials and they are intermediate. But then suppose if somebody makes components, for example, somebody makes a nut and bolt and sells it to a company to make further things, or makes a small machine which can be used for making a larger machine. So in that case, intermediate can be also man-made intermediate, not necessarily raw material. I can believe this can remain clear to us. That is why I used them differently as raw material and due to timely lack of imports of intermediate goods. All right, because agricultural raw material we had. We were producing enough cotton and we were producing enough of plantation crops or rubber, at least from the requirement of those days. But intermediate goods is where we were struggling. All right, so these are the reasons why supply of intermediate goods was low. Now I need you to go further on that. You just write below this. At the end, yes. Didn't have the resources to do that. For example, take for example, you need something to produce for electricity. All right. For online people, I'm answering a question that why it was not sufficient. We didn't have sufficiency in intermediate goods. So just to answer your question, so if you need to produce electrical, say a transformer. Now for that transformer, you will need a copper content module. But India did not have enough copper. And that had to be imported from places like Chile, places like Indonesia, and so on. So unless we didn't get that on time, we couldn't produce it. Even today you will see that in many, take the recent shock that we got on this semiconductor. You see that? So when you look at this whole thing happens because not every country can produce all the components that you would need. All right, that was the reason. Now, and plus remember, we had just become independent, so our capacity also to produce was very limited. Now you write below this, service growth, just give a heading, service growth, this is service sector growth, service growth between 1956, service growth between 1956 to 1966. So we are talking about the growth in service sector. I'll give you around 100 words on this in case they ask you something here. service sector growth between 1956 to 1966. I am assuming that all of you understand the meaning of economies of scale. For those of you who don't, it is the advantage of large scale production. All right. When you are producing on a large scale, then in that case, you can buy your raw materials in bulk, so you can get them cheaper. You can hire better workers because you can pay them better. You can get better technology because you can pay for it. So in that case, your production can be at a lesser cost. And that is what we call economies of scale or advantages of large scale production. All right, keep it like that in mind. Now, service sector growth, you write few things and then we go further. You write service growth was experienced at an average of 6% per annum in this time period, which was relatively lesser than industrial growth. So remember, this was a time period in India when service sector growth was relatively lesser than industrial growth. One of the rare periods in India. Otherwise, normally service sector has dominated industries by a large margin. In the same thing, you write banking services had improved at a faster pace full stop. Government had established SBI, State Bank of India. In a bracket you can write 1955. This was the SBI Act of 1955 through which we established SBI. Earlier it was the Imperial Bank of India. The story goes like this. Earlier we had the presidency banks. 1808 there was Presidency Bank of Calcutta, and then 1839 there was 1841 there was Presidency Bank of Bombay, and 1843 there was Presidency Bank of Madras, and then these three were combined to create the Imperial Bank of India in 1921, and then Imperial Bank of India was converted into State Bank of India in 1955. All right, so that is the history of SBI as it became one. When I teach you banking, I give these things to you. We will be discussing these, but that is the history of SBI. But important thing was, when government entered banking, it started setting a benchmark. Benchmark means a standard. That okay, other bankers could find now that okay, this is the lending rate set by government, this is the borrowing rate set by government. So other bankers could also then relate to that, and people could also relate that okay, if government is giving at this rate, what are the others doing? All right. So you write there with SBI 1955 and associates of SBI. These were 7 other banks which were established. Associates of SBI, in a bracket you write, in 1960 and 1961. Full stop. With growth in requirement, close the bracket and then full stop. With growth in demand for financing economic activity, growth in demand for financing economic activity, banking sector grew at more than 7% per annum in this time period. Then you write in the same thing, financial sector also recorded growth with establishment of LIC. This was 1956. Again, this was LIC Act. So LIC and other subsidiary companies, LIC and other subsidiary companies, gradually there was GIC and then there was Oriental Insurance and so on. All right. So other subsidiary companies which improved insurance service provision and UTI, it was Unit Trust of India. UTI, this was 1964. UTI was established in 1964. UTI, Unit Trust of India. UTI, 1964, as the first mutual fund of India. UTI as the first mutual fund of India. Mutual fund, I hope again you must have heard of it at least. And mutual funds are actually organizations which will take deposits from people and then invest them in various assets, earn money out of that, and give return to their depositors. So when several people bring their money together, among others, that's the mutual fund part that we call them. India did not allow private mutual fund, but we allowed government mutual fund, and UTI was the only mutual fund in India till 1996. 1964 में UTI establish हुआ. 1996 till then, till we reformed our financial sector, UTI remained as the only mutual fund. And it would give quite high returns at times to people, became a saving spot. When I'll teach you financial sector in India, I'll teach you that. But that is what the government had a nice recourse to. UTI, government mutual fund. LIC, government insurance company. General insurance companies, government owned. And after 1969, even banks nationalized by the government. So public deposits indirectly were completely available for government's requirements. You understand that? So that again became a ploy in those days. That okay, this way people will deposit their money in the bank, in insurance, in mutual fund, and government gets accessibility to that, indirectly of course, but gets accessibility to that nevertheless. So that became a method that this way also government will control the structure in the system. Then you change the paragraph and write, communication and trade showed relatively lesser growth. Communication and trade showed relatively lesser growth. In a bracket you write, both below 5%, due to less policy support. And inward-looking policy of India. of India. I will explain that to you. Less policy support here is that government was mainly busy with industries, especially capital goods industry. So communication, mainly the Britishers had developed telegraph system in India, and there was a postal system in India that continued in kind of a cruise control mode. All right, that system continued. Regarding trade, actually India started going down. Trade growth remained negative with external trade, if you take that. When we became independent, 1951, India's share in global trade was 2.5%. This is just to explain to you that what I mean by that. By 1961, this had come down to 1.4%. By 1971, this had come down to 0.9%. By 1981, it was 0.6%. And by 1991, it was 0.5%. Again, you don't need to remember these data. मेरा काम धंधा है, मुझे याद रहता है. मैं आपको बस convince करना चाहता हूँ. I only want to corroborate it that this is how India's external trade was going down. You understand that? That our share in global trade was going down. Our promotion of exports and imports was not huge because we had an inward-looking policy. So trade, I hope you will recall, in the first class I had given you the services sector. So trade is a part of that, and trade was coming down overall. So that was the idea. All right, that overall trade factor showed a negative growth, and that meant services were showing decline with international trade. Domestic trade was rising, but not very fast. So overall trade was showing a low growth, communication was showing a low growth. You write below that, high growth was experienced. High growth was experienced in public administration, comma, defense services, and community services, which reflects the rising role of government, in the economy. I hope this point explains itself. We were setting up more district headquarters. We were setting up more police stations. That was public administration. All right. Similarly, we had to fight wars, and then we had to go for defense preparedness. So more recruitment in army, more recruitment in Air Force or Navy. That was adding to service bill in defense. You know, the income addition in defense became higher. And similarly, community services were about developing the governments in the local areas, not the local self-government per se, but governance in local area, the state government's presence in local areas, and that all resulted in increasing these sectors. Another trend which was visible in this time period was faster growth in infrastructure services, especially road development and development of railway services in terms of capacity creation. All right, so you just change the paragraph and write, infrastructure services showed high growth and transportation in a bracket you write mainly road and railways. Transportation, and in a bracket you write mainly road and railways. Transportation mainly road and railways, was always among top three expenditure sources, was always among top three expenditure sources in the first 3 5-year plans. I hope we are okay on that. And you know, in fact, in the second 5-year plan, transportation was at the top, followed by electricity. That government was giving a lot of source to these developments. In railways, we were not making new rail lines much, even though we were making few, but not much. Britishers had left us with 53,000 kilometers of rail line. So we didn't add much to it. Even today, India's total rail line is 68,000 kilometers. But what we were doing was, we were converting single line into double line, or double line into multiple lines, or narrow gauge into broad gauge. All these things we were doing in those days. All right, so railway capacity development in that sense. Road, of course, was a big challenge for India, because road development in India was badly restricted. So we did go for road development to a great extent in those days. Now, we take it further. Come here. We take it further. We now talk about, okay, you write one more line below this. This is about concluding this time period. You write, at the end of this time period, when I say this, it means 51 to 66, in 1966. At the end of this time period, if you have a fear you will forget it, so bracket mein 66 likh lo. All right, in a bracket you can write 1966. At the end of this time period, two major problems of Indian economy remained unresolved. I repeat, two major problems of Indian economy remained unresolved. They were first, continuously increasing poverty. Now that was reflecting that growth was happening, but growth was not reaching everyone. So the trickle down kind of thing that government had thought will happen was not happening. You know, so poverty was rising. And second, lack of self-sufficiency in food production. Lack of self-sufficiency in food production. All right, these were the two issues that remained. I'm giving you around 50 words on one more thing, that is on recession of 1965-66. All right, so you just give a heading on that. You give a heading. These are small things, but they can just push us this side. Recession of 1965-66. If you recall, I had made you few lines on recession of 1957-58. The idea is, in case they ask us a question on recessions before, liberalization, 1991, and writing a short note on that. All right, that what was India's growth process, or examine the recessions that happened in India before 1991. Now, chance remains few, but what has happened is, due to COVID pandemic, we had a recession in 2020-21. I'm assuming all of us understand that recession means GDP growth becomes negative, or GDP is falling. So we had a recession in 2020-21 because of the lockdown, etc. So in that case, over 2-3 years, this remains a possibility that UPSC can test you that whether you know that recession had happened earlier in India also. Mind you this, you will read it in many places that 2020-21 was the first technical recession of India. 2020-21 was the first technical recession of India. That is 2 successive quarters in recession. All right, whenever you see this word, technical recession means 2 successive quarters report recession. 2 successive quarters report recession. So if you have quarter 1, quarter 2, or quarter 2, quarter 3, or quarter 3, quarter 4, then you say that you are in a technical recession. All right, so technical definition of recession is if 2 successive quarters report recession. I'm assuming you understand that quarters means 3 months of the year. There are other meanings attached to quarter in India, please avoid that. All right, so quarter here only means 3 months in a year. So if we divide every year into those 3 months each, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, and January, February, March. These are the 4 quarters. In this, if you have 2 successive quarters, like when we say 2020-21, then quarter 1 and quarter 2, they had recorded negative growth rate. These 2 quarters had negative growth rate, and we said India had its technical recession. Now please understand, we say that India had its first technical recession because India did not measure GDP quarterly till 1997. It is only from the accounting year 97-98 that India started doing a quarterly measurement of GDP. उसके पहले हम सिर्फ एनुअल मेजरमेंट करते थे जीडीपी का, क्वार्टरली नहीं करते थे 97-98 तक. So till 1997-98 we would do only annual measurement of GDP, not quarterly. So obviously even when we had recession 1957-58 or 1965-66 or 1972-73 or 1979-80, these are the 4 years of recession that we had in the pre-91 period. Now we don't know whether these period also had recession quarterly or they didn't. You understand that? So we cannot comment on technical recession in India pre-1996-97. And that is why the newspapers would tell you that this is the first technical recession of India. And that was more because of the measurement factor. That in 2020-21, we had 2 successive quarters where we had a recession. So we called it the first technical recession of India. I'm sure you also understand that that year was an annual recession year too. 2020-21 was an annual recession year too. Just to keep you in sync, if we take nominal GDP of India and real GDP of India, then 2019-20, India's nominal GDP was 220 trillion rupees. 2019-20, our real GDP was 145 trillion rupees. Then 2020-21, our nominal GDP became 205 trillion rupees. And our real GDP became 133 trillion rupees. अगर आपको ट्रिलियन अच्छा नहीं लगता तो लाख करोड़ कहते हैं इसको. Alright, so 133 lakh crore, 205 lakh crore, that became the GDP. So that was annual recession. That our GDP actually fell over these 2 years. Of course, then in 2021-22, this GDP became 237 trillion rupees. And this was 148 trillion rupees. That is why when you will see the discussions across you will see that if we can take real GDP also, but just for the sake of it. So if we take nominal GDP, it was 220 trillion rupees in 2019-20, and then it fell to 205 trillion rupees in 2020-21, and then it increased to 237 trillion rupees by 21-22. So you will see that they keep calling it V-shaped recovery. All right, that is the idea, that they keep calling it V-shaped recovery. All right, that GDP fell and then came back or slightly ahead of where it was. So that was the V-shaped recovery. So that is the idea here. We will discuss it and we will discuss the reasons of it and so on. But that is the idea of a V-shaped recovery. All right. Now, and even if I had taken real GDP here, I'm sure you see that it is, again, it will represent a V-shaped recovery. That GDP falls and then GDP rises. That is what is said to be a V-shaped recovery, suggesting that when people say it's a V-shaped recovery, they suggest that once the pandemic took some breathing space, then we could recover and come back to the GDP level where we were earlier. All right, that is the idea of a V-shaped recovery. But just thought I'll tell you that, and we will discuss it more. There are different shapes of recovery people talk about, like K-shaped recovery also. But then K-shaped recovery we will discuss later. For the time being, I'm waiting for more data, because until we don't have more data, we can't conclude on a K-shape. Remember, since I mentioned it, I'll quickly introduce you to that. आप अभी सुनते रहो, ये बातें बाद में भी डिस्कस करूंगा, but मैं चाहता हूं कि आपको थोड़ी बातें समझ आने लग जाएं. I will be discussing these things with you later, but right now I just want that you should start getting my points when I talk some language here. So when we say K-shaped, just think, and you know, in our country we don't love theories, we love politics. So K-shaped, the meaning we have changed, you know, but anyways, I'll tell you the meaning of K-shaped. So K-shaped comes like this. This is my income ladder. ये जो है, ये है मेरा income ladder. सबसे highest income यहाँ, lowest over here. All right, the highest income people here, lowest here. Now, if you have a recovery such that your people above a certain income level go up and people below that income level come down, you say that recovery is K-shaped. All right, that this is the income stream, and if people above that income level go up and people below income level. So, you know the typical story of rich becoming richer and poor becoming poorer. You know that story you would often see. But during COVID pandemic in India, it becomes quite a tricky situation because we don't know. Because during COVID pandemic, certain rich became richer, but certain other rich, like people who were working at high positions in private companies, people who were running good enough, unorganized sector, but good enough businesses, they lost money, and a lot of it, you know. So in that case, like many private sectors started paying their workers at 50%, 40%, 60% salary. Now they were losing money. They might have been earning 5 lakh rupees a month, 3 lakh rupees a month, 2 lakh rupees a month. Suddenly their income was slashed by 40, 50%. Now that means all rich were not getting rich. There could be some rich who could be getting poorer also. You understand that? Similarly, which sector is one of the better performing sectors in the last 3 years? पूरे अच्छे तरह से याद किया तुम. Agriculture is one of the better performing sectors in the last 3 years because agriculture was the only sector during COVID pandemic which was growing positive, and that also at the rate of 3.9%, close to 4%, which is quite high for Indian agriculture. Indian agriculture doesn't record 4% growth, real growth of 4%. Now, agriculture includes even people who will be relatively poorers of Indian economy. So again, it is not necessary that all poors were doing badly. It's possible that for some poors, the income just might have been rising. So concluding that it has to be a K-shaped recovery, again, if you are ideologically convinced, I cannot convince you, you are beyond remedy. But if you are willing to understand, then until we don't have more data, it is difficult to find out that exactly how does it go. You know, it's difficult there. We need much more data than what we have. Now, those data will come with NSSO surveys over 2 years, 3 years, and we will get to know what kind of recovery we had. But right now, if somebody says, अगर अभी कोई बोल देते हैं that it is a K-shaped recovery, well, then maybe our conviction is taking the better of our knowledge or our analysis. So sometimes convictions work better, no doubt about it, than the knowledge. I say it in many of my classes. I'll tell you that also. Look, at your stage now, you know that a 10th standard exam is useless. But still, if it is your sibling taking the 10th standard exam, you will be after their life. 10th है वे पढ़ ले, क्यों पढ़ ले? तुम्हें तो पता है 10th का कोई फायदा नहीं है, कोई नंबर आ भी गए नहीं आए कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता, तो सिर्फ 10th है इसलिए क्यों पढ़ ले? 9th में भी पढ़ ले और 8th में भी पढ़ ले, फिर 11th में भी पढ़ लेना. लेकिन हमने एक सिस्टम बना रखा है, 10th में खूब पढ़ो, फिर 11th में मत पढ़ो, फिर 12th में खूब पढ़ो. Point is, this is outdated. There was a time when after your 10th you had to take admission outside your school. So in that case, people had to study hard and get a board exam marks so that they could get a good college at the 11th level. That went away with the introduction of 11th, 12th in schools in many places in India. Now that meant 10th standard started becoming redundant. 12th, people used to think if you score well, then you will get good marks and a good college and you do well. Again, the point is, why not study in 11th? Makes no sense. But still somehow we told people don't study in 11th. But then in 12th standard, people would study hard to get that. With CUET and all, that is gone. But end of the day, we are still pushing people to study hard in 10th and 12th, board exam, relatives who never remember you, suddenly remember you on that day, the result of that exam, and so on. We have made it hyperbolic, that's belief, conviction. That no, these are somehow important. So Indian system has and global system has it, but since we are Indians, Indian system has many of those. If rupee depreciates, we all behave as if our kidney is being lost. Again a belief system that depreciation of rupee has to be bad news. Not necessarily always. There is something called real exchange rate, and you got to cover on that also, rather than only nominal exchange rate. But हम वो बातें करते ही नहीं है. तो ये belief systems हैं. तो अगर तुम belief system से नहीं मानो और मेरी बात सोच के चलो, तो मैं बस इतना कह रहा हूँ, if you don't go by belief system and just listen to my argument is, right now if somebody asks us, do we have a K-shaped recovery? The answer is we don't know. Now some people have nicely and conveniently changed it. They are saying some sectors are growing well and some sectors are not growing well, hence it is K-shaped recovery. Then what is this? इस K का ये डंडा क्या है फिर? Because the economic theory that I studied said that this line stands for income level and then the K made out of that. But if you say sectors, how do you put sectors? A qualitative data with a quantitative data. Wonderful. We are doing all sorts of things to prove our point. That okay, I'll take qualitative data one place, quantitative on another, and I will not even know what I'm doing exactly. But I'll say, oh, some sectors are doing well, some are not doing well, so K-shaped recovery. No, you don't say that. You got to define what is this. And this has to be income. And that income we don't know, so please keep that in mind. Again, I will discuss the different shapes of recovery when I'm teaching you India after 91, but at the moment, I just wanted you to keep in mind that when people tell you V-shaped, well, yes, we don't deny that. But if people say K-shaped, that's something we will have to wait and watch. Maybe by next year we will be in a better position to know that if growth in 2021 was 21-22 and thereafter has been K-shaped or not. I hope we are slightly clear on this idea of V-shaped, K-shaped kind of thing. Huh? No, we are not saying income per person. We are saying income from sectors where you will find rich and you will find poor. No, that's still taking the 2011 census. And to some extent we use the NSSO numbers, the projection of population. You can always project the population, no? We know at what rate we are growing. So census of course corroborates it, no doubt, but otherwise we know that there is a particular rate at which we are growing. And you have your National Family Health Surveys. So they give you an idea of total fertility rate in different states. We just had it last year, I'm sure you would recall. So all that gives you a basic idea of where my population will be today. So it's not difficult to project the value. We extrapolate actually from the data concerned. All right, now, yes. Right. Okay. Okay, so the question I'm answering is that during the pandemic, there were migrant workers who had gone back to their rural areas for getting work, and was that the reason that agriculture was growing? Actually, the reason agriculture could do well were two, but when I'll teach you agriculture, I'll elaborate better. But one reason was that government was giving a lot of minimum support price support, and there was a lot of rural expenditure done by the government, like Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana. So a lot of procurement happened from rural areas. Also, the structural changes in rural areas, like introducing, using Jan Dhan Yojana for transfers of money to accounts of people, that had its own role to play. But major role was MSP increase. 2020-21 MSP increased by almost 40%. Another role was with policies like PM Kisan, that was also adding to agricultural growth there. Another was the government policies during COVID, where they did not put the lockdown restrictions during the procurement time and during the purchasing time of raw materials and all, and sowing season. So the lockdown was the major reason why we had a problem in India. You know, that since we had a very strict and very stringent lockdown, the government somehow thought that they can stop a virus by locking us up. But then they thought many things. We were doing many things. हम तो थाली भी बजा रहे थे. So, so they were doing several things across. But they thought that. So we went into a very strict and severe lockdown. So that kept us in this lockdown for 6 months. And that was the biggest reason why we had a recession. Like if you see, when we ended this lockdown, the 2 quarters were recession. When we ended the lockdown, the revival began from the next 2 time period. So I think it was mainly that villages did not have as much lockdown as what cities were having. The enforcement was also not that tough. Plus the government created windows that during sowing season, during harvesting season, the lockdown will be relaxed. And along with that, the MSP program. These 2 things were actually working quite high. All right. Then now we come to the discussion here on the recession of 1965-66. I'll just give you basic hindsights in it, so you please write it down. You write, this is for recession of 1965 and 66. W shape, we will discuss it, but that comes a little later. W shape is you go up, come down, again go up, again come down. It's like that. So it's like that. Yes. No. W-shaped should mean that you are here, your GDP comes down, your GDP comes back, your GDP again comes down. Now that is not happening. We are saying this rate of growth will slow down, but economy will keep growing. You understand that? For W shape, you need the economy to fall again. Maybe when they say that we are revising our growth rate, your growth rate downwards, fair enough. They're saying that we might grow even 6%. Now, even if we grow 6%, we grow, isn't it? So it's not a recession. It's not coming down. You understand that? If you take the growth rate also, still the growth rate is above even the 1920 level when it was too low at 3.9%. So if you ask me, W-shaped is not at the moment that India sees. W-shaped means you should come down, go up, come down, and again go up. Now, this part I don't see happening because we are still going up, even if we are going up at a slower rate. All right? And I repeat, this for the online people. Somebody had asked me this question. LIC in 1956. All right. You take this up now. No, it's not an arbitrary number. Now, the question I'm answering is that talking about income ladder, isn't it faulty to base our distinction between rich and poor on an arbitrary number and then say that certain people are above and certain people are below poverty line? Now, poverty line in India, again, if you look at it, makes no difference to any kind of benefits or otherwise given to people. Please keep that also in mind. Initial few classes, I deliberately keep taking all these questions of yours because I need you to know these things. Poverty line के वजह से ना उज्ज्वला योजना दे रहे हो आप. उज्ज्वला योजना के beneficiaries कैसे select होते हैं? How do you select beneficiaries for Ujjwala Yojana or Garib Kalyan Ann Yojana? SECC. So we are using the socio-economic caste census. That means even if you are below poverty line or above poverty line, and National Food Security Act in any case qualifies most of the people, for the food security part. So poverty line in India doesn't become relevant. But the K-shaped part I was telling you was theory, that if people above a given income level are rising and people below a given income level are falling, it's not about poverty line, but it's about which income level you are at. And then if everybody above that income level is rising, and or majority at least, and everybody below that income level is falling, I was challenging the point that it can't be on everybody. All right, that is the only challenge that I was putting to it. So unless we don't have more data, we would not be able to know exactly what happened. All right, that's another interesting thing that you tell me. Pharma in which okay, I understood your context. Fair enough. Pharma was one of the better growing sectors, no doubt. Another thing I also hear, and this I need you also to know, that inequality has been measured by the World Inequality Report, Oxfam, saying top 10% own 57% of national income, according to data. So gap has increased. And is it not reason enough to show that K-shaped growth has accrued? That is, again, something you need to understand. And I'm smiling because we Indians love to say that gap has increased, not realizing that we are the top 10%. Top 10% according to the same World Inequality Report are people in India who are earning above 11 lakh rupees per annum. So if you are in India and earning above 11 lakh rupees per annum, as a family, not as an individual, then you are in top 10% of India. And they do include 57% of India's total income. Now if somebody says that shows a higher income inequality, well, that higher income inequality or increase in income inequality has to be tested with asset inequality. How much success did we get in land reform? You tell me randomly, how much success did we get in land reform? Not much. It was a very limited success. All right. What is the main source of asset in rural areas? Land. Where do majority of people stay in India? And we want to believe that we did not have inequality earlier. Seriously. So, income inequality in India has to be clubbed along with asset inequality in India, which has always been very high, and we have not worked very hard, even in the so-called socialist period of India's growth, to curb that asset inequality. Most of us sitting here, including yours truly, are people who can trace our family and income growth to our rural asset. Most of us, I'm not saying all of us, but most of us, सबके पास गांव में एक ज़माना था जब 300 बीघा, 400 बीघा, 200 बीघा, 500 बीघा ज़मीन थे, सबको कहानी सुनाई दी जाती है, अरे हमारे जो दादाजी जब जाते थे, खेत इतने खत्म नहीं होते थे, कुछ के अभी भी हो सकते हैं, और वो ज़मीन देख के ही हम, उस ज़मीन की वजह से ही हमारे पेरेंट्स पढ़ गए, ग्रैंड पेरेंट्स पढ़ गए, उसके चक्कर में हम पढ़ गए, तो इनइक्वालिटी तो बढ़ी, लेकिन उसका रूट कॉज क्या है? द लैंड इनइक्वालिटी दैट वी नेवर कर्व्ड. And we very conveniently say that inequality is rising now. Well, when did it go away from India? That's an important question to answer. As a researcher, I will try giving you the correct perspective always, because, a lot of perspective in India is ideological based. So I'm answering a question in the manner that I'm trying to give you a point that this rise in inequality in India looks stark because now the income level in services is much higher and we have not done much for agriculture. So if you will have 44% of population in agriculture producing 18% of GDP, while you will have 26% of population in services contributing 53% of GDP, obviously inequality will look much higher. So that's not good enough to say K-shaped recovery. This inequality has always been there in India, at least in the last 30 odd years post-globalization, and asset inequality has been there in India for last 300 years. So asset-wise, we have always been unequal. So never find convenience in saying that, oh yeah, inequality is a new thing in India. Inequality is not a new thing in India. Inequality is quite well established. Some of you have, I see many of you from the GS classes, you would have heard me saying this. We are inherently feudalistic people. That's inequality in our country. Get up for the person my age, if my son will get up for him if he comes to my place, provided he is of my background. If my driver comes and my son doesn't get up, that's ridiculous. But that's feudalistic structure, and that's inequality. So be very careful. Inequality in India is quite a dominant domain. And when we say 10% people control 57% of the assets, actually these 10% people are there in the urban areas of India, and the rich ones in the rural areas of India. And again, most of these people have high accessibility to assets, building, land, fixed deposit in the bank, shares that they are holding. So these assets give them unearned income. Income for which you don't work, you get it without working for it. So labor income has not grown much in India, whether rural or urban. So be very careful about saying this. And inequality, again, I will repeat. And then, there is another thing I want you to think before I take you into this, since we are debating all this. Imagine now, if we claim inequality has increased K-shaped recovery is there post-COVID, then we have some serious thinking to do. Because we spent approximately 5 lakh crore rupees on food subsidy in 2020-21, and we spent approximately 2 lakh 60,000 crore rupees on fertilizer subsidy in 2021, and we spent 75,000 crore rupees on PM Kisan, and we spent 1 lakh 5,000 crore rupees on Manrega. Now all this adds up to 8 lakh crore rupees. If in spite of spending 8 lakh crore rupees, the poor have become poorer in rural areas, got to do some soul searching, who is taking this money then? ये सवाल उठाना चाहिए फिर कि भाई अगर 8 लाख करोड़ रुपए खर्च किए और गरीब गरीब ही हो गया तो खर्च करना बंद करो. क्योंकि सेम सेट ऑफ लोग जो कह रहे हैं गरीब गरीब हो गया, वो कहते हैं सरकार को खर्चा बढ़ाना चाहिए. तो आपका बकेट टूटा हुआ है, उसमें और पानी डालोगे. You have a broken bucket, you can't put more water in it, provided you have a broken bucket. But if we are spending 8 lakh crore rupees and poor are still becoming poorer, well, that suggests we have a broken bucket. Because how many agricultural households are there, or how many rural households are there? The population of rural area is 70% of India's population approximately. I'm sure you keep reading that data. Let's take, nowadays they say it's 66%. Let's take even 70%, that's 100 crore people. Now 8 lakh crore rupees spent over 100 crore people. Some introspection is needed here. That what exactly we did with this money. Where did it go? So please understand, again, we can't take data selectively as it suits us and fix it up. I'm trying to teach you that by this discussion. Data has to be looked up in totality. ये सीखना अभी से शुरू कर दो. Newspaper reports put data and do a copy paste of it. They just fix it up. अच्छा ये data है, इसको fix up कर दिए, बात हो गई. It is not the case necessarily that it will work everywhere. So take all the data that are present and then put across it. That okay, if all these data support my things, then I can convincingly believe that it's happening properly, and I will conclude, yes, it's happening. Always beware, as students I'm teaching you this, always beware of not committing confirmation bias. Sometimes we are convinced about something, then we see something supporting it, and we say, yeah, here it is. But then you were already willing to see that. So just be careful about it. Don't suffer from confirmation bias. India has been an unequal country for very long. We didn't do land reforms very well, and that meant the inequality in asset continued, and the continuation inequality in asset creates a continuation of inequality in income. And it is not perpetuated necessarily now, it has been there since some time. So always remember that. All right, let's see this then. So you please take it down, you write. The growth rate of economy in 1965-66, growth rate of economy in 1965-66 was minus 2.1%, comma, which was the second time, which was the second time that India experienced recession. Second time that India experienced recession. In the same thing you write, this was due to drought in 1965, which resulted in reducing agricultural growth, by large value, in a bracket you write minus 8.5%. And don't forget, agriculture was the dominant sector. So if the dominant sector grows at a very high negative rate, then that's trouble for the economy. All right, so minus 8.5%. Then you write below that, industrial slowdown was experienced. Due to shortage of raw material. Full stop. This shortage was because of lack of domestic resources, due to poor agricultural performance, and it was also because of lack of foreign exchange to import raw material, because it had to be committed for food import. Then you change the paragraph again. Industrial अभी आ रहा हूँ उसमें. Industrial development was also constrained. Due to instability created by war, which led to disrupting supply chain, and increasing recession, disrupting supply chain and increasing recession. You change the paragraph again and write lack of enough consumer goods comma especially food and clothes created inflationary tendencies which further increased cost of production and discouraged output growth. All right, keep these 4 reasons with yourself as reasons why we had a recession in 1965-66 and how it and what was the impact in that sense. All right, so these 4 reasons: the shortage of food, shortage of clothes created inflationary tendencies leading to recession of 65-66. Now we go further. Yes. No, the real problem was that the war was on the Western Front majorly, and Punjab, Haryana would be big suppliers of food. Other than that, once the war happened, you channelize all your resources to the war. So in that case, if you have a truck, it goes that side. If you have railway movements, it will go towards that side to make sure that that is the priority and you save the country first. You understand that? So all those things then disrupt the rest of the things within the country. Now see, the next time period, I'm now taking you into time period 1966 to 1980. Just to clarify, because one of your friends had asked me this question online, that does K-shaped recovery take both asset inequality and income inequality? K-shape is only income inequality. Aman, I think you can see the video once more, because if I go again into K-shaped recovery, it will be spending a lot of time on which I will be teaching you later anyways. But in case you want to listen on the K-shaped recovery part, if you could just see the video once again that is available for you. Now, other than that, so remember again, just to complete my answer to the question, supply chains don't only mean war. Import. Supply chains can mean internal supply chain getting disturbed if you have linkages from various places. So don't forget the entire western sector, Rajasthan, Punjab, and so on, were disturbed, and that then meant that entire energy of the country was in that direction. So don't only focus on imports there, it will apply on all of those. All right. Correct, land reforms not happening is hurting us now. Manrega was helping 105 crore rupees was given in Manrega, 1.05 lakh crore rather. So that of course was the help. All right, I have been asked a question, so I'm answering it. Remember the question is how lack of consumer goods creates inflation. Okay, who will tell me why will lack of consumer goods create a general inflation? क्या सोच के बोला मैंने ऐसा? हाँ. अच्छा चलो, the consumer goods are less, so people are willing to pay more, so that creates inflation. All right, something else? Okay, it will imbibe the necessity. something that strikes you? Somebody here should be a master's in economics. मैं तो उससे ऊपर भी चला गया ना. Okay. Have you heard of something called wage price spiral? Then I'll tell you what, again, those of you who have not heard of it, remember, as food prices increase, as essentials increase, they will increase the demand by workers to give them higher wage. And if workers demand higher wage, the firms to some extent will be compliant and can give them higher wage, but then the firms will increase the price further. And as the firms increase the price further, the workers will see that higher increase in price and then again demand a higher wage. And that is a wage price spiral. So whenever you have inflation due to food price rising, this is the real danger that every economy faces. That is why people are worried always about a food and essential price increase. Because as soon as you will have this kind of an inflation, the spiral will build up. Because people will see the price rising, they will demand higher wage, and as they are given higher wage, it's inbuilt now, the price will rise, and as price rises further, the workers will ask for higher wage, and that will mean again price will rise. So that is a wage price spiral. All right, so always keep that in mind, that is the key of cause of inflation when food prices start rising, that it creates a spiral. Yes. No, but that will happen only when the taxable wage rise. All right. In India, the wage rate was not that high at that time. What was happening was that rural wages were stiffening up. And then add to that the war that was happening. So that meant that the wage situation remained tight. All right, so that was the reason why inflation picked up with all. I hope all of us are clear of how inflation is connected to a food price increase. And we see that something similar happening today in India, where food prices are high and fuel prices are high. So whenever you have a supply side inflation, this kind of a problem is always in the mind, that this just might happen to us. All right, I hope we can keep that theory in mind then. All right, now see, when we say 66 to 80 period, this period is called a period of structural retrogression. Unfortunately, we don't have broken data for this period, which is very convincing. So we have data for 1966 to 69, and then we have data from 1969 to 79. So I have clubbed them together. All right, we have data from 66 to 69, and then 69 to 79. So I have brought them together. All right, that we will study them together as to what happened. So if we see in this time period, what was happening was, this time period was one of the bad time period. 1966-67, we had a BOP crisis. And this was mainly due to food shortage, because the drought was in the second successive year. 66-67, we had a BOP crisis, and this was mainly due to food shortage because the drought was in the second successive year. So it was creating one problem for us. But it was not the only reason. There was another reason of BOP crisis. Commodity prices increased. And with devaluation of currency, imports became costlier by a large proportion, and therefore worsened current account deficit. This was one problem that we were having. So this was a big issue we had. Commodity prices increased. Commodity prices keep increasing as a cycle, actually. It's a wage price spillover effect. It is that as wages become more, the price becomes more, and as price becomes more, workers demand higher wage. That is wage price spiral, SPIRAL. I will teach you this in macroeconomics, you wait till then. But that is wage price spiral, all right? That wages become more, and due to that, the price becomes more. Yes, Shubhankar, you have given the right answer. All right. Correct, Vikas. I hope you have taken it down. All right. So remember, what happened was, and this was the reason that Mrs. Gandhi after that became terribly against any appreciation, any depreciation. Mrs. Gandhi was told the J curve effect. All right. So she was told that you go for currency depreciation, and if you depreciate your currency, then it will result in immediately your trade balance worsening, because your imports will become costlier and your exports will become cheaper. But with that devaluation, as exports become cheaper, countries will start buying more from you, and that will result in your exports picking up and your imports falling, and your trade balance will improve. But what happened was, unfortunately, we went for devaluation in 67-68, the commodity, 66-67, the commodity prices increased, but from 66-67, the global economy went into a recession. So the volume effect never happened. That exports will also pick up, that never happened. Prices increased for imports and prices decreased for exports, so our trade balance looked bad. You know, immediately हमने depreciation किया. अगर हम devalue करेंगे अपने currency को, fixed exchange rate था उस time पर, so we had a fixed exchange rate system, we devalued the currency, our imports become costlier, our exports become cheaper. Again I repeat, please do read NCERT, macro, if you have not yet read it. Alright, ये सारी बातें वहाँ लिखी हुई हैं, आप समझ जाओगे. Please do read for those of you who have not read it. Now if imports become costlier, exports become cheaper, the trade balance worsens. You know, export minus import will become more negative. But then theoretically it says that as exports become cheaper, people will buy more exports, and as imports become costlier, people will buy less imports, and therefore the economy will again grow. But the problem that happened was, as soon as we devalued, global prices went up and global economies went into a slowdown. And that meant global demand did not pick up. So we had thought that exports will pick up. We had thought that exports will pick up with the fall in price, but now prices fell and exports didn't pick up. And that meant that the BOP became even worse, the current account. Also remember, Americans were in a punishing mood, so they were not releasing the aid very easily through World Bank. We had just had a war with Pakistan. They had continuously said don't go for a war. We still had to go for a war because Pakistan was otherwise taking over few things in Western sector. So the Americans did not like that. And when they didn't like it, they don't punish you by saying anything. What they did was they delayed the PL 480, the wheat that had to come to us, and they delayed the release of money from World Bank. And that meant we were in a problem. That now we had a situation where how do you pay for your imports? So that became a reason that we had a BOP crisis in these days. And that crisis was also a factor that created the recession of 65-66, recession of 72-73 later on, because it just piled on. उसके वजह से बहुत सारे effects हुए जिन्होंने 72-73 का recession किया. But this recession of 65-66 was important because it kind of just went on. 65-66 we had a bad year, then 66-67 we had another bad year. You know, so that was the reason why government suspended planning for 3 years here. You know, this 1966 to 1969, government said we will make annual plans, but in several books you will see the name Plan Holiday. All right, government said we will make annual plans, but in several books you will see they call it Plan Holiday. But we went for a plan holiday because nothing was happening according to the plan. You know, so we were planning something, it was just not materializing. So we had 65-66 recession, 66-67 BOP crisis, 67-68 the crisis continued, You know, it was only around 68, 69 when food production started rising in India, with Green Revolution gradually spreading, that we could start breathing a little easy. But it was only around 68, 69 that this was happening. And again, 71 we had a war. So they were slightly difficult years. That is why, just giving you some trend again, so that is why 1966 to 69, GDP growth has been approximately 2.1%. 1966 to 69, GDP growth was approximately 2.1%. We don't have industrial data in detail, but we have the capital goods industry data. Capital goods growth at approximately, again, because these data are approximate, the government of India never released them. They were taken up by different researchers. So this data I am taking, 66 to 69, by a research done by Professor Dandekar and Professor Rath. So these data are from them, Dandekar and Rath. If you by chance have to write in your exam, you can write according to Dandekar and Rath. All right. So they were actually collecting the data for poverty estimation. In the process, they got this data and presented it. So industrial capital goods growth was approximately 4.9% per annum, all of these. So this is one number we have, but then we have numbers for the 5-year plan. So 1969 to 1974, GDP growth did not pick up much. It remained 3% per annum. GDP growth remained 3% per annum, with, mind you, 1972-73 being the third recession year of India. But we don't have, again, much information here because there was no analysis of why we have a recession. All right. So this was the third recession year of India, but 69 to 74. Industrial growth in this time period was 3.8%. This was one of the lowest that we had grown. Industrial growth was 3.8%, which was one of the lowest that we had grown post-independence. And capital goods industry grew at 4%. Consumer goods industry grew at 5.6%. You bear with me, I'm writing it. I know it will be slightly difficult to visualize it, but I'm speaking it. Intermediate goods industry, so consumer goods, capital goods industry 4%, consumer goods industry 5.6%, and intermediate goods industry grew at 1.2%. So it was actually the intermediate goods industry which was hurting us quite badly. All right, we were not growing it much. So 1969 to 74, the growth trend showed a lot of degeneration. India was not doing well. So GDP growth at 3% per annum, and industrial growth at 3.8% per annum, capital goods industry at 4%, consumer goods at 5.6%, and intermediate goods at 1.2%. The interesting thing was that consumer goods were doing quite good. All right, interesting because supposedly we were following a socialist system, and in consumer goods, the best performers were beverages and perfumes again. Tea, coffee, etc. That was one good performer, and perfumes. So beverages and perfumes were one of the better performers throughout this time period in consumer goods sector. Then, if we take the growth into the next part of that story, 1974 to 1979, GDP growth was at 4% per annum, but there is one thing that we need to keep in mind. This 4% per annum was, if we take 1975, the emergency year, when India claimed that it had a GDP growth of 10% per annum. Now, God knows. We don't know. Honestly, I'm telling you, we don't know that whether we had it or whether it was emergency and people wanted to please Mrs. Gandhi, so a good picture was created. We don't know. I'm honestly telling you. But we have to accept it because that was the official data. But just to give you a caveat, ये आपको पता होना चाहिए कि ये जो 4% आ रहा था, ये इस 10% की वजह से आ रहा था. If we remove this 10% from the system, if we remove this 10% from the system, then the average GDP growth falls below 3%. So this 4% growth came for these 5 years because of this 10% here. So if we remove this 10%, then the growth rate falls badly. But we'll stay with this. And industrial growth was at still 4% per annum. It kind of continued. This was 3.8% here. It slightly increased to 4%. Capital goods industry were not doing well in this period. They grew at 3.5% per annum. Consumer goods again recorded a high growth, around 6% per annum. And intermediate goods were also not doing very well. They were growing at 2% per annum, even though they already had a low base. So this was during 74 to 79. No, 66, 67 was India's recession, Deepthi. World economy was not collapsing, it was in a slowdown, and we had the disadvantage, no doubt. Oh, that was because globally the exchange rate was fluctuating. I'll teach you that. But that is why people shifted from fixed to floating exchange rate. But exchange rate systems were responsible for global slowdown. So it was not a global recession, I repeat, it was a global slowdown. Actually, the revenue rise from exports, correct Kavya, that is Marshall Lerner's condition, but we generally assume that India would be exporting manufacturing as we did in those days. All right, I can believe the entire source I have taken are from the publications done by NSSO and also compiled in economic survey. These like if you see, I'm covering with the 5-year thing here again throughout. So wherever we have a 5-year data, it's clearer. Wherever the 5-year data is missing, we have a problem. All right. Now see, we have the trend, and again I repeat, don't try remembering this up. इसको रटने की कोशिश मत करना, ये नहीं होता. Important क्या करना होता है? Trends याद रख लिए. In which time period capital goods was rising, in which time period capital goods was not rising, and so on. All right. You write below this. I have to make you write few things now. थोड़ी देर आपको मेहनत का काम करना पड़ेगा, ज़्यादा लिखना पड़ेगा. So you take it down. Yes, yes. One factor could have been that, I can't deny it. Another factor was that we were putting less efforts in capital goods now. We were believing that we have enough capital goods and there was a lot of excess capacity. Like we had capital goods, but the production was not happening. I mean, we were not able to use that. So that was also a factor happening. All right, you write in this then, the period is called structural retrogression because India was giving up on several gains that it had already made in the past time period. For example, decline in growth of capital goods comma increase in impact of also sorry, but I need you to know this. Also, don't forget that there were years of oil shocks. Both the years where you see India hitting a recession, 1972-73 and then 79-80, were both years of oil shocks. So oil shocks were hurting us too, because we were energy hungry always, and we were importing a lot of energy. So whenever oil shock would happen, it will beat us back. So that was also a trouble part. All right. So you continue that. Increase in India's, you wrote import of? Okay, increase in impact of external shocks, increase in impact of external shocks like oil shock, comma, showing higher vulnerability of Indian economy. The slowdown experienced again further, before taking you further, I can believe as a classroom you can understand the difference between slowdown and recession. Recession means GDP growth is negative, that is GDP is falling. Slowdown means that GDP is still rising, but rising at a lesser rate. Alright, so whenever we use the word slowdown, it means GDP is rising at a lesser rate. Recession, GDP is falling. Alright, so whenever you hear the word recession, it means GDP is falling, GDP growth rate is negative. Slowdown, GDP is rising, but it is rising at a lesser rate compared to what it rose in the previous year. Alright, that is how slowdown is different from recession. Alright, so in a slowdown you are still growing, but growing slowly. Recession, you are going down, the GDP is falling. Alright, the slowdown experience, you wrote that? Put a full stop. No, you wrote right like this. Yeah, put a full stop and write. The period also showed frequent shortages of essential commodities and instances of high inflation, for example, inflation was at 11%. Inflation was at 11% in 1974-75. and change the paragraph and write, the period had 2 years of recession. The period had 2 years of recession first, or in the same thing you write, 1972-73, 1972-73, this was minus 2.4%, 1972-73. Again, if you don't remember, it's okay, but just to let you know. And 1979-80. And 1979-80. In 1979-80, the growth rate was minus 3.6%. Minus 3.6. In 72-73, it was minus 2.4. So 2 years of negative growth in this time period. You write in that then, the structural retrogression especially in industrial sector, structural retrogression especially in industrial sector was due to following reasons. And you can take them as 1, 2, 3, 4. So you write 1, declining performance of public sector enterprises. Declining performance of public sector enterprises. Put a dash and write, this was due to poor pricing strategy. Okay, I need you to understand this. See, when you look at pricing strategy for public sector, pricing strategy for public sector, there are few well-defined ideas here. The well-defined ideas are, 1, if it's a pure public good, if it is something where you cannot exclude a person from consumption and there is no rivalry, one person consuming affects no other person's consumption. For example, defense, law and order, administration, these things are to be provided fully free of any charge. So things like defense, administration, law and order, and so on, they have to be provided free of cost. Government should not be charging for this. Then, if they are providing what is called merit goods like education, healthcare, these are merit goods, clean water supply. So they will keep people with sanitation facilities. I can add to that. So education, healthcare, clean water, sanitation, these are merit goods. They have positive spillover effect, externalities as we call them. All right. So they have positive externalities. They provide benefit not only to the individual who is getting it, they also provide benefit to the society. If you educate a person, the educated person doesn't only help themselves, they can help others also. Similarly, health will mean, or sanitation will mean, that overall the social system becomes better off. So it is said that these can be provisioned at subsidized rate. You can charge a small amount, but you can give it at a subsidized rate. If you are very rich as an economy, you can give these things free. All right, because the state of the economy will also decide what you should be doing in your pricing strategy. So if you are a very rich economy, give it free of cost. Otherwise, you can charge a little and give some subsidies on this. Then the other possibility is, third, what are called public utilities. So public utilities are things like electricity, railway, storage facility, government storage facility of course, and so on. These are public utilities that we can think of. Now, in some economies, roadways can be public utilities. In some economies, roadways can be merit goods. It's a flexible thing. You can put it across. But suppose we take these, for example, in this case it is said that you should have user's cost approach. In this case, you should have user's cost approach. That is, whatever is your expenditure, recover that. If you have spent 100 rupees in giving this provision, recover that 100 rupees. So user's cost approach means recovering expenditure, no profit seeking. Don't try seeking any profit here. Recovering expenditure, no profit seeking. Don't try seeking any profit over here. Try recovering your expenditure. That is user's cost approach. All right, don't try seeking any profit here. Try recovering your expenditure. So say for example, if you are spending 20 rupees on production, make sure that at least you recover 20 rupees from the consumer. That is called user's cost approach for public utilities. And then there are commercial goods. In case of commercial goods, there should be rate of return approach. Rate of return approach means profit at market rate should be targeted. Profit at market rate should be targeted. That is called the rate of return approach. That profit at market rate, this is RATE rate, profit at market rate should be targeted. That is rate of return approach. All right, that say if you are selling scooters, and if you are running an airline, or if you are making a hotel, so if you are doing these things, they are commercial goods. इनका कोई लेना देना नहीं है लोगों के भलाई से. यहाँ आपको प्रॉफिट ही कमाना चाहिए, नहीं तो यहाँ से निकलिए. Don't do that. All right. So you have 4 methods of pricing the public goods. That there can be, yes. Which one? Parks, you mean? Parks, you can put them in something like either a merit good or public utilities. All right, but not public goods. Put them either of the two. Recover something from people. All right, in that case. Yes, if it's a public park in an area where poors are living, then you can believe that you don't need to charge it. All right, that ways. Actually, what happens that it depends on what level of economic system you are in. So if you are a rich economy, you can afford more things for free because your tax collection, etc. will be high. And if you are a relatively poorer economy, you will have to be conscious about how you are using your money. So these things become fungible in that case. Important thing to keep in mind is what India was doing as a mistake. And one more thing, UPSC optional syllabus doesn't talk about different methods of public sector pricing, but IES syllabus puts it across. It says public sector pricing strategy. All right, and this is public sector pricing strategy that should be put. So when we say public sector pricing strategy, but all of you should know about this, that in India the mistake we did was, these things were free anyways, we started charging lesser on these, and we started charging lesser on these. So public utilities and commercial goods were also provisioned at a comparatively lesser rate. And that becomes the problem part. That now how do you recover your money? And public sector started running into losses. The problem is not only losses per se, problem is if you are not recovering your money, then that means you don't have enough resources to upgrade, technologically advance, do research and development. That capital expenditure money is lacking. Then what do? You understand that? So that is what was happening with public sectors in India. Remember, when I will teach you public sector, I will bring it back again. But from 1951 to 1966, public sector was growing relatively better. In fact, their rate of return was positive. There was a positive 3% rate of return that public sector was earning. But from 1966 to 80, it became worse, and the rate of return became negative, minus 2.3%. So the real decline of public sector in India can be traced to this time period. And one big factor was this poor pricing strategy, where we priced everything on subsidy. So even electricity was given free, and even water supply was given free. But then along with that, less charges on hotel rooms, and then everything attached to freebies for members of parliament, for bureaucracy, for their friends, etc. अब देखना अभी भी हमारे यहाँ कल्चर चलता है. सर्किट हाउस बने हुए हैं, डाक बंगलोज बने हुए हैं. ये किस बात के लिए बने हैं? Why are circuit houses and डाक bungalows there? So that when people go for tour, they have a place to stay, because there will be no hotel across, and you want to save the money of your worker, who is, say, a government officer. Then there is no business for private people to stay in it, no? On the recommendations of government. But we see this misuse rampant in India. That I can have a nice friend who can be a government officer, and this person can recommend for me a dak bungalow or a circuit house, and I can go and stay there on government's expense, paying subsidized amount, but that is not meant for me. Ideally, I should not be staying there. And if I start staying there, that's exactly what you call free ridership. So we have to be careful that we save that expenditure. If we can save such expenditures, public sector can perform better. There are many things in that. Say members of parliament getting free railway ticket and free airplane ticket. It can be either of the two where both these things go. एक समय में एक साथ दोनों जगह तो नहीं बैठ सकते, तो एक को रिलीज कर दें. The members of parliament or members of state legislature can choose, okay, I'll fly, or okay, I'll go use train, and the other can be freed. Now both remain booked, and that created the problem, especially with Air India as a public sector unit, and that made them sometimes not being able to recover their money. So that was the problem part in public sector. So poor pricing strategy. I hope we are clear on this. All right. Then in the same thing, you write, poor pricing strategy. In the same thing you continue, overstaffing of public sector. In the same point, continuing with that, first point, yes. Overstaffing of public sector, positive 3% was the growth rate in 51 to 66 in public sector, which resulted in overstaffing in public sector, which resulted in higher wage rate and higher wage payment and less efficiency at work. So one is higher wage payment, that your wage payment goes high, it becomes quite on the higher end. And another is your efficiency will be less because everybody will think somebody else will work. You have more people than what you need, so everybody thinks somebody else will work. That is lesser wage payment, that we need to keep a lesser efficiency at work. The way South Africans were batting the other day, everybody thought the next one will make some run. So that is the idea, that when you need 2 people and when you have 5 becomes a problem. I'll give you a point there. In Indian Railways, even now, the overstaffing is in the ratio 2.6:1. जितने लोग हैं वो 2.6 times ज़्यादा है जितना चाहिए उससे. So the overstaffing is tremendous. In state electricity boards, the DISCOMs, distribution companies, the overstaffing is 3.9:1. 4 लोग ज़्यादा हैं लोग हैं एक की जगह पर. And this is all because of a lot of political interference that happens. That people will get recommendation letters from members of Legislative Assembly, Parliament. They will go for asking a job and they're given a job. Not on the upper end. Upper end you need an exam, etc. But lower end it starts becoming filled up. And that became a problem in 70s, big time, for public sector. And in the same thing you write, poor choice of raw material, after a comma, poor choice of raw material, so poor pricing strategy, overstaffing at work, and then poor choice of raw material because of the condition that it should be sourced from a public sector firm only, so that was the condition in India. In some sectors it is there even today, that if you are a public sector company and you want to buy raw material, then that should be sourced from a public sector company. If you are a public sector company and you have to buy a raw material, should be sourced from another public sector company. Now see, 2 problems arise here. One, if the public sector company is giving me a relatively inefficient raw material, while I can get something better efficient from somebody else, I'm still not allowed to get that. And 2, if the public sector company which has to give me raw material doesn't supply on time. We saw this very recently when Coal India failed to supply coal on time to electricity generation units, creating a semi-crisis in India in this year's March, April. So now what do? I'm dependent on somebody to supply me raw material and that somebody is not doing it. Now that became quite frequent and that resulted in a chain of inefficiency. That there will be one raw material supplier inefficient and that then kind of made everybody inefficient. So that became a problem part for public sector. And in the same thing you write, put a comma, poor technological development due to lack of capital infusion. I'm repeating myself. Poor technological development due to lack of capital infusion by government. Which resulted in increasing their capital output ratio, in a bracket you write, showing inefficiency in capital. It's like this. When we talk about capital output ratio, we will keep using K for capital. and we will keep using Y for output. So when we say capital output ratio, it is units of capital needed to produce extra units of output. Units of capital needed to produce extra units of output. And this capital output ratio started rising quite a bit because technical infusion was less. सरकार पैसे कम डाल पा रही थी पब्लिक सेक्टर में, जिसके वजह से उनका मॉडर्नाइजेशन नहीं हो रहा था, तो जो मशीन्स थे वो आउटडेटेड होते जा रहे थे और उनकी एफिशिएंसी कम होती जा रही थी. I'm just repeating myself in English. Government was unable to put money into the public sector, due to which its efficiency was falling, as capital infusion was not there, so modernization was not there, and that resulted in increasing the capital output ratio. Implying what? Think if the units of capital needed to produce extra units of output. That means if capital output ratio increases, it shows it needs more capital to produce an output, reflecting lesser efficiency of capital. Reflecting lesser efficiency of capital. Do I believe I reach you on this? All right. And then you write one more thing in the same point, and so public sector, see, what I'm trying to make you write were the issues that public sector started facing. And I'm deliberately not making you write political interference, because all of this was due to political interference. So we are focusing on the economic factors. I'm trying to teach you how the answers start differing between a GS paper 3 and an optional paper 2. In a GS paper 3, you will write political interference. You will not mention capital output ratio. You understand that? Do not mention jargons in GS paper 3 much. You rather lose marks. Alright? इस चक्कर में इकोनॉमिक्स वालों के लिए कभी-कभी दिक्कत हो जाती है. That वो क्या करते बोलते देखो मैं तुम्हें अपनी इकोनॉमिक्स दिखाता हूँ, मुझे कितनी आती है. But don't do that. It should be a simple language in your GS paper 3, a generalized language. In economics optional paper 2, we will use the terms and terminologies more because the examiner is expecting us to present that. Like this kind of a discussion in a GS paper 3, one suggests that you should have the knowledge, but don't put it unless, I'm so sorry, unless asked. But in optional, of course, you should put it across to examiner that I know what is public sector pricing strategy. Alright, so these are some differences while writing optional paper 2. In GS paper 3, you will not go into all those details of data that I have been giving you and so on. Optional paper 2, of course, we are going into that. Like what I am teaching you in the last 3-4 classes now, tomorrow also we will finish this off. So what I'm teaching you over 4 classes, normally in a GS class, some of you have done it with me, it takes me 1.5 session, sometimes maximum 1.5. So this is how it should differ in your preparation strategy also, that the depth in optional paper 2 will have to be more than say a GS paper 3. So the question is of how deep you are taking it. All right. So we take it further, you write then after that, and lack of timely appointment of head of the institutions like CEO or CMD. That was another trouble part. Sometimes for months the CEOs will not be appointed. Now imagine if you are headless, how do you function? आपके head कोई है ही नहीं, तो decision making कैसे होगी? So these were the reasons why public sector were doing badly, and that was one reason of structural retrogression. Again I repeat, structural retrogression means giving up on the past gains. whatever benefits you had had in the past, if you lost on those benefits also, that is called retrogression. All right, so retrogression means giving up on the past gains. तो अगर आपके पहले कुछ अच्छा भी किया और वो भी लूज कर गए आगे बढ़ते हुए, तो उसे कहते हैं retrogression. All right, and structural retrogression means that your structure which had become better earlier was now declining. All right, so that structural retrogression is reflected that capital goods industries were doing better earlier, but now they were declining. The rules were compared, like public sector pricing strategy, etc., was better earlier. Now it was becoming bad. So that was structural retrogression. Do I believe we are okay on that? All right, so this became a very important reason because of a simple point. Public sector would be the major commanding heights. I can believe you understand commanding heights. That is, they will control all the important sectors. And now if public sector doesn't perform well, then obviously the economy starts doing badly. You know, if the public sector doesn't perform well, the economy starts doing badly. You'll be with me till here? All right, then I will keep the story here at the moment. We will begin from here tomorrow. We are in a zone where we will finish this and savings investment trend tomorrow to finish this part of the topic. After that, I will start teaching you agriculture in India between 47 and 91. Thank you. Have a great day. Aajo, aajo. हाँ नहीं, मैं अभी आंसर करता हूँ, वो करूँगा जब मैं तुम्हें पढ़ाऊँगा इंडियन एक्सपोर्ट्स. अभी फ़ायदा है क्योंकि हम अभी एक्सपोर्ट्स करते हैं उन चीज़ों को जो इलास्टिसिटी इनकी हाई है. तो अब अगर करेंगे डेप्रिशिएट तो उससे बेनिफिट मिल सकता है. हाँ, उस वक्त नहीं था, बिल्कुल. हाँ बिल्कुल, उस वक्त नहीं था. Telecom is generally into utilities. Devendra, telecom is utilities. No, railway can be kept under merit goods, but they are more like public utilities, serving people. Public sector banks are commercial enterprises. Yes, ICOR, correct Manish. Ayushi, I hope you got me, otherwise you can see the video, please. Domino effect means when things collapse one after another. So domino effect is kind of a negative word, Parul. It's in financial sector. Things collapse one after another. Trickle down effect is when growth reaches the least portion of population. There is disguised unemployment, correct, Pritha? Sure, Anusha, you can ask me. Structural retrogression is when you give up on the past gains. When you give up on the past gains, that is structural retrogression. Per capita income growth rate is growth rate minus population growth rate. GDP growth rate minus population growth rate. Economics for pre, I couldn't get the question, Anupam. Self-sufficiency means I will not be interacting with outsiders. I will only produce everything myself. Self-reliance means I will become a part of global supply chain. Public sector growth decline is 66 to 80. Yes, this is one of the reasons, Anusha, for high SSI. Rate of return, it is rate of return, not rate of revenue, Manasvi. Rate of return means target high level of growth rate in profit. That is rate of return, target high level of growth rate. Crude oil was playing a role in inflation increase, Vigneshwaran. Dual gap means having enough domestic resources as savings and having enough resources of foreign exchange also. That is dual gap. Collapse of things can be because of any factor, any negative factor. Thank you, all of you. Bolo, bolo. Possible. That was a factor. Quasi-public goods. Yes. In 66, 67. Global slowdown happened, and that hurt our demand. नहीं, सेकेंड 5 ईयर प्लान में तो इंडस्ट्री ग्रो कर ही रही थी. सेकेंड 5 ईयर प्लान में तो दिक्कत नहीं था. दिक्कत तो आनी शुरू हुई 66 के बाद इंडस्ट्रियल ग्रोथ में. मतलब public utilities are those which you are using for everyone, like say electricity and so on. Merit goods are those which can give a positive externality. Public goods are pure public goods. Their public goods are those which are non-rival and non-excludable, where there is no rivalry and you cannot exclude people once they are entered. But they can be excludable. I'll just take a second. PSU and public sector enterprises aren't same. They are not. And undertaking is different from enterprise. Less policy support means not giving them tax benefit, not giving them subsidies. That is less policy support. Trickle-down effect has worked in developed economies, but over a very long period of time. There should be labor force, yes, not workforce. There should be labor force, Praful. हाँ बिल्कुल. Ideally, the government should not be trying that, but we will discuss it when I discuss telecom with you. Freebies is a problem, no doubt about it. It's a poor government pricing strategy. Capital output ratio. How much extra capital do you need to produce an extra unit of output? That is capital output ratio. Suppose, I'll just take a second. Suppose you have a capital output ratio equal to 4. Now that means you need 4 units of capital to produce 1 unit of output. Now suppose if it falls to 3, it means now you need lesser capital to produce output, and that shows more efficiency. You understand that? That kind of a thing. No, that's fine. You keep it with the class notes because I have taken it with the new series we have got. No problem. Go with the class notes. No, the overall demand was declining for commodities, so intermediate goods growth was declining. Everything. So intermediate goods usage was also declining. Yes. No. It was mainly that intermediate goods were declining because the use of commodities was declining. उस कैमरा को एडजस्ट कर लो अविनाश, संदीप वो कैमरा एडजस्ट कर लेना, देखना उसे. In the later period, the base effects were there, but the consumer goods gradually got normalized. Like you started producing more, and then that base effect went away. But 47, 48, the consumption was so low that base effect would have a role on that. All right, that kind of a thing. I'll just take 1 second. 1 second lunga bas. Inward-looking policy means not willing to export and not willing to import much. So we were that in 1950s and 60s and 70s, that we believed that we will not export much and we will also not be importing much from outside. Pricing strategy for public sector, Manasvi, is that if it is a pure public good, then give it for free. If it is a merit good, then give them some subsidy. If it is not a merit good but a public utility like electricity and all, then charge the cost of production. And if they are commercial goods, like say hotels and all, then charge full price and earn profit. I hope it explains. I mentioned it that even though we had so many people in agriculture, still agriculture was not doing well. I suggested that we had to import food, and that import of food was coming through PL 480 scheme. US, yes. It was an arrangement between India and US that they would help us and we will import it from them and so on. So that was the idea. again, those industries where the demand happened and those industries which were capable to supply, in those industries the growth was still happening. For example, ancillary units were those which got their demand from the large scale industries, so they could get some supply, output. Similarly, large scale industries did not have to suffer from lack of economies of scale and so on, so they could still grow. Yes, and also, it was about who were already positioned to grow. So if somebody was already in a position to grow, then they were growing good. But if they were not already in a position to grow, then effectively we didn't see a high growth. See that? Raw materials are always a subset of intermediate goods. All raw materials will be intermediate goods. In fact, there were more years of BOP crisis, Pritha, but recession were these 4 years, sure. Base effect means if you produce something lesser last year, then this year, even if you produce a little less, a little more, the percentage term will look higher. And if you produce something higher last year, then that will mean that your production will be the percentage term will look lesser this year. तो अगर पिछले साल ज़्यादा produce किए, if you produced more last year, even if you produce the same amount this year, the percentage term will look lesser. That is the base effect, that how the percentage looks because of which base you are producing at. Okay, we'll try taking care of it, Aditya, tomorrow. Let's see if it helps. High inflation will reduce growth. High inflation का मतलब हुआ inflation at 8%, 10%. If inflation